Hi everybody, welcome back to This Is Us Tuesday. We're going to pick up our story where we left off last week, and we are in December of 2007. I've been in prison now for a few months in Centralia Correctional Center, and I'm kind of finding my place, so to speak, and trying to do what I can to help other inmates. But at the same time, I'm still holding out hope that, I can get out early, and I applied for work release and was hoping to get that because that provided different levels of the program where I could continue to work, provide for my family, but also have additional supervised and then eventually unsupervised time with my family and my kids. And so that's what I was really hoping for, and I was still feeling somewhat optimistic that I had a chance to get that. And going into December, it was kind of rough because that was going to be our first Christmas that, we didn't spend as a family. And so I'll let you talk a little bit about that.
Well, it was the kids were kind of bummed out, and it was just kind of didn't seem like it was really Christmas. I always dressed the kids in Christmas pajamas and to try to match them, and I don't know what I was thinking, but I put them in SpongeBob pants with a black shirt. So it was just the kids weren't that happy. Somebody had reached out to me from a place that was I think it was Angel Tree Network, and they had said they had presents for the kids since he was in prison. So there's a ministry who provides Christmas presents for kids of inmates, which I thought was really cool, and it was neat. The kids were excited to get a present from him, and I got to tell them that it was from him. So they thought it was really neat, but we were just, bummed out.
Yeah, and I had also tried my best to make them, feel like I was thinking about them, and I made each of them a Christmas card where I would actually draw, characters and use my colored pencils and make them a card, and then write a note on the inside to make sure they had that. But obviously, it's not the same.
Right.
And so that was kind of the hardest part initially for me, is being away from them for Christmas. And I had mentioned in our last video or last episode that I was denied work release, and we kind of dug through our stuff, and I actually was not denied until January of 2008. So I got a letter from the Illinois Department of Corrections, and it's got the governor at the time for Illinois, Rod Blagojevich, and the director of the IDOC, and it says that you were recently submitted for transfer. We have been advised by the transfer coordinator's office that you were denied transfer to that facility for the following reasons, and there's about 27 different reasons that could occur, but they have highlighted the reason that I was denied was because of the nature of my offense. And then it says, if you're interested in filing a grievance to this denial, please direct your correspondence to such and such, to the Prisoner Review Board. And so, it was a huge letdown. It was also very confusing because we had all of the requirements of work release, which I had met. I didn't have a violent crime. I didn't have a Class X crime or felony. Nothing I did was of violent nature, and I was a first-time offender and all that stuff. So, it was just a huge letdown. Shortly after that, because that was January 18th of 2008, it was my youngest son Joey's birthday towards the end of the month. And I'll let you...
That was hard. This was his idea. He said, pack the kids up and have presents. At the time we had a van that his mom had got us, and it was a Honda Odyssey, but it had inside the floor a little compartment that opened, and I could hide presents in there. So the kids didn't know there was presents in there hiding. And when we got to the prison, we had kind of timed it where he would call. And he called us on the phone and talked to Joey and told him he had a surprise for him. And Joey was real excited, and he opened his presents while he was on the phone. And then we went inside to visit, and Joey got like a little cupcake thing out of the vending machine. So that was Joey's birthday. Obviously he had a kid party at home, but we always had done birthdays, family and kid parties, so we kind of did something like that for him that year.
So his birthday cake that he had with me was like a Hostess cupcake, and we got to sing happy birthday as a family, and tried to make the best of a not so good situation. So we had that, and then I was immediately trying to file this grievance and get this work release back on track, and it took about 30 days later, and I got a response. And it basically says, this is in response to your grievance received on February 14th by this office regarding a transfer to Southern Illinois Adult Transition Center. Your transfer was denied by the transfer coordinator on January 11th with the rationale nature of offense. This office has determined the issue will be addressed without a formal hearing. Based upon a review of all available information, this office recommends the grievance to be denied. The transfer has been reviewed in accordance with established department rules and procedures. While there are established eligibility criteria, placement is at the discretion of the director. So what that's basically saying, and again, it's got the Governor Blagojevich's name and Roger Walker, the director. What it's basically saying is, even though we have set out guidelines of who's eligible or can be eligible, it's basically at our own discretion if we grant it to you or not. And so this was the second time that they denied it based on literally nothing. I think I had, filed one last appeal, and then in March, it basically says my request is denied again. And so in this process, it was very confusing because on Stephanie's end and with my mom's help, they were looking stuff up on the IDOC website at prisoners that had actually received work release and were out on work release.
And we were advised to, we had kind of exhausted all his options, and somebody had mentioned, the only other thing we could do is file for clemency. So to file for clemency, we had to put like a binder together of, a letter from the psychologist, a letter from our state representative we went and visited. We drove to Springfield. We talked to newspaper people. We had like so much stuff that we did to get together for this binder. And I had been searching on the IDOC website, printing off multiple pages of inmates who were released on work release custody with armed robbery, violent crimes, residential burglary, just stuff that you wouldn't want those people out on work release, that they would be like a threat to society. And I put all this stuff in the binder to bring to the Blagojevich's secretary. We met with her. Her name was Mary, I think, Stewart. At the time, me and his mom went. We met with her. She actually gave us a tour of his office. He's like a big Elvis fan, and she was real nice. She said, she would leave the binder with him and talk to him, and I was hopeful. And basically, yet again, we had to meet with the Prisoner Review Board, but got denied. So it was just a big waste of time. I kind of learned after the fact, it's like we fought and fought and fought. It took like months to, put together, a lot of hours spent, and it was just like, had to just give up because it wasn't worth fighting.
But just to give you an example, when they started looking up these inmates that clearly did not meet even the guidelines set forth by the Illinois Department of Corrections, they were getting work release. And for an example, this gentleman, was convicted of a Class X armed robbery charge, which is excluded from being eligible for work release. And when she started talking to the governor's office and sending emails and raising a stink, and we were questioning why this was happening and how individuals like this were able to get work release, all of a sudden, and she had printed this information out already, all of a sudden on the IDOC website, these charges that made these inmates ineligible for work release disappeared off of the Illinois Department of Corrections website. So this gentleman, for example, had armed robbery class X, but he also had possession of heroin, and that was on April of 2008, April 22nd. 2 days later, after this was brought to the attention of the governor's office on April 24th, 2 days later, his class X felony fell off of the screen, and then all that was left was his class 1 possession of 15 plus grams of heroin. And that was kind of their way, I guess, of covering their butts and saying, hey, he doesn't have a class X felony, but he did. And this is the corruption, or part of the corruption, that was allowed to happen under Rod Blagojevich's watch, during this time. And it's very harmful to the public and bad that they did this, because it's not only did they give work release to somebody that was not eligible, but they were putting a violent criminal that had multiple offenses, drugs, armed robbery, out into the public, giving them freedoms and the ability to commit another crime. And the state of Illinois had a history of that, where people that should not have been out on work release were given work release, and while they were on work release, they would commit crimes, and then, that would cause more damage to people. And so by them taking this off of the website, it gave the public a false sense of security to say, hey, he's not a bad guy, he's only got this small drug charge, when in fact they intentionally hid the fact that he had a class X armed robbery. And this one individual is not the only case.
No, we've got multiple
different inmates that were given this work release that shouldn't have been. And then from the inside, I personally, in my unit, saw kids that had breaking and entering and different types of, more violent charges get out and go into like work release, and then they would actually come back and I would see them again while I was in there. So the whole system was completely unfair. And I will go on to say, we'll kind of fast forward things, the end of that same year that this was going on, and we raised these questions, and they were making these changes on the IDOC website, and subsequently I was denied clemency as well from Rod Blagojevich. Later that year, in December of 2008, he was charged with different types of corruption and was then later sentenced to prison. And as some of you may know and have seen in the news, President Trump commuted different people's sentences, but the state of Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich is one person that he commuted his sentence, and he was released from prison after serving, what was, I think, like 8 years or something like that. And I will say this, going through this, we were devastated, and frustrated and mad and angry and all that stuff. Having said all that, going through what we've gone through and being denied, and it's kind of ironic that the person that had my freedom in his hands and turned, and not just mine, because I heard there was, I think, over 3,000 cases requesting clemency that he didn't even look at or consider. And he took the ability of people, their ability to return to their families or get back into society. He took that away from people. And then ultimately, he was granted, that opportunity himself. Going through the things that we went through, me having to be away from my family and my kids, Rod Blagojevich had 2 kids of his own. He had spent over 8 years away from his family. And so when we got news that his sentence was commuted and he was out of prison, I asked her what she thought, and we kind of talked about it, and we basically both said the same thing, that, you know, although, you know, he didn't treat us fairly, we were not upset that he was let out. Because
I mean, I feel like he served his time, and I think it's nice that he gets to be out with his family. I think if you're just like a basic individual and you go into prison, and, you know, for us, we kept fighting for boot camp, work release, clemency. It wasn't meant to be. It was until we gave up and just realized he was supposed to be there for a reason. I think that was the hardest part, but it was just something we were supposed to go through in our life. And I think it's so true. You know, God's more concerned about our character rather than our comfort. And that's what has built our character today, you know. But it is frustrating because I see so many stories of people who are out on prison and then they killed somebody, that if they would have been kept in, that person wouldn't have got killed, you know. So that's the frustrating part to me. But I'm happy he got out, because I don't think he should have to be punished for 20 years. I mean, he made a mistake, and hopefully he realized what he did was wrong, and hopefully he learned and grew from it. And I think it's neat he gets to be with his family again. You
know, there are some instances where, you know, people maybe do not deserve a second chance. You know, for the most part, you know, especially first-time offenders, first-time nonviolent offenders. And, you know, you have to kind of look at the circumstances on each case or each individual. And that carried forward, you know, later in our lives, and we'll share some of that in future episodes. But, you know, we have kind of changed our mindset of, you know, if it could happen to us, it could happen to somebody else. And there's maybe more to the story that you maybe see on a piece of paper or on an application or whatever. So we use that in the future to give people a second chance and give them consideration. The other thing I'll say, just kind of, because we kind of zoomed through a lot of that, is just to restate that this was my toughest time in prison, probably from that first Christmas through that hope of getting work release, and then having that denied 3 times, the clemency getting denied. That period of time, you know, was very difficult for me. In that period of time, I'd seen people leave and come back, and it just hurt me so bad to see that these individuals are being given the chance to get out and be free and be with their family and do things that are productive, and then they just squander it and waste it, and then they're back in the same place that they just left. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there just pleading and begging for a chance and not getting anywhere. Also, from a medical standpoint, or a medical side of things, I had developed a cyst in the back of my neck, and, you know, you didn't get really any kind of treatment when you were in prison, and the best that they told me to do is just hold a warm wash rag on it, and that could draw some of the stuff out of it. And so there was a discomfort there, and you know, that's just something additional that kind of nagged me that I had to deal with. So I also remember getting my second cellmate, because the first cellmate I had that had 3 DUIs, had caused the death of somebody in his third incident. It was an accident that cost somebody their life. He was released, and so I moved from the top bunk down to the bottom bunk, and I got a new cellmate. And every time, you know, somebody maybe new came into the unit, or, you know, especially in this instance where I had a new cellmate, I would talk to Stephanie over the phone, tell them the person's name, and she would look up their information and tell me what they were in for. And I found out that this second cellmate of mine was in for some type of...
He was a pedophile.
Crime like that. And so I was very leery, and I remember I went to Yard one day very early on, and we had a separate property box that had all of our books, our pictures, our Bible had to be kept in this certain box, and I always kept things a certain way. And when I came back from Yard, I looked in that box and noticed that my stuff had been shuffled around, and more specifically my photo album that had pictures of my wife and kids in it. And I immediately assessed, what am I going to do about this? Because I've got a pedophile that I wasn't crazy about being the cellmate to in the first place. Well, now he's getting into my stuff, looking at pictures of my kids, and I knew something had to be done about it. But at the same time, I'm trying to not get written up. I'm trying to get all the good time I can to get out. I'm trying to fight for work release and clemency and all this stuff. So I leaned on the individual I had made friends with that was much bigger and scarier looking than myself and told him what had happened. And he walked right into the cell, right up to this guy and just said, pack your stuff. But he didn't say stuff. He said, walk yourself to segregation. And the guy said, what did I do? He said, pack your stuff and get out now. And the guy literally just grabbed all his stuff and walked up to the officer and said he wanted to go into segregation. The other thing I had to worry about too is the fact that he walked himself up to the officer and asked to be put in segregation. They're always looking at the reason why, what happened between him and his cellmate. So I had to try to kind of stay out of that part. And so he got him removed from my cell, and then about 2 days later I received my third and final cellmate, and I found out what he was in there for, and she looked it up, but he also had told me, and he was charged in the same county that was literally out to hang me. The same prosecutor, Julie Kasuzik, had went after him. And basically, he was a younger guy than me. He had done something really stupid. He had gotten drunk one night, and he was in the parking lot of like a gas station or something, and our convenience store, and he lit the contents of the dumpster on fire. Just really stupid thing to do. It didn't cause any damage to the building. There was no other property that was damaged. Nobody was hurt. But the fact that he set that dumpster on fire, he was charged with arson and sentenced to, I think it was about 2 to 3 years in prison. But they didn't play around in that county that this happened in. And so him and I got along through the rest of my stay. Didn't have any issues with him. And so that part was good. It also worked out well because he worked in the kitchen overnight and I went to school during the day. So a lot of times there was only one of us in the cell, which worked out. But in that dark time, I just want to share one more thing. One morning I remember waking up and I had a cyst on my neck. I'm bummed out, went through Christmas away from my family, getting denied, work release, and this clemency thing's getting started. And I remember I just had this pain in my heel. And I thought, oh my gosh, what now? What is this pain? This isn't good, because I can't get this checked out in here. The medical, treatment that you get here is horrible. And I remember reading something in the Bible about Paul. And so I looked it back up in the Bible, and I'm going to share it with you here real quick. And it's in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 11. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 7 says, "To keep me from becoming conceited because of these surpassingly great revelations, there was given me a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why for Christ's sake I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong.'" And so when I first read that, I kind of stopped at, that 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. And, that's what it felt like. It felt like a splinter, a thorn in my heel. And I remember just praying to God, and I prayed it 3 times to take this pain away from me. And after the 3rd time of praying for this to be taken away, I didn't have that pain anymore. But going on to read, so that was amazing in itself. But then going on to read the rest of that passage, it kind of reminded me again that, you know, what I was being put through, and this is something that I carry even now to this day. You know, I look at what I had to go through, my persecutions, my hardships, my weakness, and it's in that time, you know, that I can, you know, say that I overcame with the help of God. And so that's still something, like I said, to this day that I don't shy away from. I'm not embarrassed of. So I know a lot of you say, thanks for sharing your story. I don't meet a stranger and for the first time meeting them, shake their hand and say, hi, I'm Justin, I'm a convicted felon. But at the same time, it's not something that I'm ashamed of or something that I hide. So for everybody out there that's going through a difficult time in your life, going through a hardship, being persecuted, any kind of difficulties like that, you know, you will get through it. And, you know, when you come out on the other side, you're going to be stronger for it. And the hardest thing to remember, and myself included, is that, you know, that's the time that you feel most like turning away from God. You should be leaning on God and, you know, reading your Bible more and praying more, and you'll get through it and you'll be stronger, and you'll be able to use that pain, that hardship, whatever you went through in your life for good. So that's where we're going to leave off. Our next episode, we're going to invite a special guest, Emily, to kind of talk with Stephanie and kind of share, you know, some of their experiences and good times and bad times, and kind of what life was like on the outside as I was, you know, in prison, going through the stuff that I was going through. And so they'll share some of their experiences there. If you have any questions, you know, for Emily specifically, that you want answered, go ahead and leave those in the comments, and we'll try to cover that in our next episode. Otherwise, we will see you guys next Tuesday, and thanks for watching.
Bye, guys.
When life is lemons, just hold me. Just hold me.